Mastodon, Pterodactyl, Triceratops, Saber-toothed Tiger, Tyrannosaurus. The five most well-known Zords of the Power Rangers universe are not even in this movie. Instead, we get new ones with some really terrible CGI to go with it. Today, we review the 1995 cult classic, maybe not. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie.
If you think you've seen the Power Rangers,
Let's do it.
think again.
I'm going in.
Think action. Think adventure.
Ooh, that was close.
Think fun.
Gotta love it.
Rockets away.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, rated PG, June 30th at theaters only.
My name is Brian DeBrain. You can find me on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks are doing at the real world. If you would like to interact with us, you can do so in one of two ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us at Twitter on Hero Pantheon. This week, my co-host is Jerome Cuson. He can be found on Twitter at JeromeC1985. He's the usual host of this podcast. I'm usually the co-host, but this week I wanted to take over because I kind of have a more extensive history or a known history of the Power Rangers. I know a lot just by virtue of like going down a rabbit hole on Wikipedia and YouTube years ago, finding out the history of the Power Rangers. It's not as old as you think. It's actually older. It's much older. And, I think contrary to popular belief, it did not start in 1993.
Right, and I think we're going to get into that in just a few minutes, but I think what makes this one of the more unique movies that we are reviewing for this podcast is that it is completely out of continuity from almost everything else. This is kind of a standalone thing, even though the TV show was going on at the time, but what I want to point out is that the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers that started in 1993, that version was one of the most popular kid shows for a good 2 to 3 years. I don't think I can properly illustrate just how popular this show was. It was a phenomenon, and it was a phenomenon on the on the television. It was also a phenomenon when it came to the action figures and some of the toys. And I think that we were kind of in this transitional period of time because I think when I was a kid, it was very much about kind of your Disney afternoon, your DuckTales, your Tailspin, your Chippendales, your Darkwing Ducks. And then as we're getting older, and I don't want to watch those shows necessarily, but as we're getting older, Fox has their run, and Batman starts, and then we get the X-Men animated series, and then we get this. And there was a time when you could go home after school and you would put on your favorite UHF station of choice, whether it was a Fox affiliate, my 50 affiliate, or whatever it was, and you could watch your Fox Kids. And this was a really big deal, and Power Rangers would air basically after school 5 days a week, and that's why there are so many episodes of the Power Rangers. I think the first season has something like 60 episodes. But I mean, this show was so popular and was the centerpiece of my afternoons and probably your afternoons and so many other afternoons for so many kids around this country.
Absolutely. Being 6 years old and the hype of it and the height of it, it was unbelievable because not only were the toys cool, but the toys were like, maneuverable. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can move the toys around, and they were very action oriented. So I would kind of mix up the toys with my wrestler toys as well. So I'd have some of the Power Rangers wrestle like some of the Galoob WCW guys and some of the WWF Hasbro guys, and I just got to cross those worlds over. So, as a kid, man, it was clicking on all cylinders. It was action packed, had bright colors, had kaiju monsters, all that stuff that I liked as a little kid. Like, even growing up, like on watching TNT randomly, I would watch random Godzilla movies, right? And this goes right up that alley. I mean, it's produced by Toei, or at least, the production side in Japan is produced by Toei and Asahi TV. So it made sense for me. I think it just clicked at the right time. It reminds me of the Batman 66 craze that lasted 3 years. It's the same kind of feel to me. It's like, it's very pop culture, explosion, bright colors, cheesy corniness. It's kind of like a rehash of that, it feels like, almost like 30 years later, except they went from Batman to the Power Rangers. But that's kind of the comparison that I see. But like I said, contrary to popular belief, it did not start in 1993. Crazy enough, as people really know, it's like, they took the show from Japan, they used the stock footage from the Japan show, and they used the action footage and then just made new footage with the new cast that they put in and spliced both together to make a show, right? It actually started in 1975. 1975, you heard that correct. That's like 18 years before even the American version. And originally it was called the first series was called Hiramitsu Sentai Go Ranger, and it was on TV Asahi. It's still on TV Asahi. What's really cool about this is that every year they'll hit the reset button. So that's why there's so many versions of the Power Rangers with different series names and whatnot and all these different continuities, is because every year they hit the reset button. Once they hit 56 to 60 episodes, they hit the reset button, they get a new cast, new costumes, new storyline, new everything. And that's how it keeps it fresh and keeps it going every year. And it made me think like, wow, that makes so much sense now, because that's why it's been going for so long in Japan, and it's still pretty popular in Japan with that. Because in Japan, we know the whole anime, like kaiju culture, robot fighting, machine culture, like all that stuff. That's been popular for like a long time in Japan. It's like this whole kind of like subgenre, and that's why it keeps going and going, and that's why it's still popular with kids in Japan as well, and adults, because of the legacy of watching the older series as a kid and then growing up as an adult. You have that nostalgia feel. So I think it works to create a new season every single year, to kind of hit the reset button and just create fresh new storylines, and I think that's refreshing. I mean, despite me not being a fan of American Horror Story, they take that same concept there, and each season is completely different with a new cast and everything, and it just makes everything fresh. So I love that idea. So what they did was Saban Entertainment basically took the series from 1990, I think it was 1991, and turned it into the Power Ranger series that we know today. So basically, they took it's hard to pronounce, Kaiju Ryu Sentai Zayu Ranger, which is basically the look and the Mastodon, Pterodactyl, Triceratops, Saber-toothed Tiger, Tyrannosaurus, those main Zords that we know and the main suits that we know come from that particular series. But then once they ran out of episodes, because like I said, each year they start over, they basically just took the next two series of the show from like 92, 93 and kind of did the same thing, except they had to replace the suits from the first season and reshoot some of those scenes to match the suits that, were in America at the time. But then once they get to Turbo, they just said, fuck it, and we're just going to just use the new suits every time, so we don't have to keep reshooting scenes with the old suits. And that's kind of why you see in the movie that they transferred or transitioned from the old Zords to the new Zords, because that's kind of them transitioning from the old series that they were using to the new series that they're going to be adapting in the next one. So that's kind of the weird history of the Power Rangers, but it makes sense because, every year, I mean, after 2 or 3 seasons, you would get really bored. And I think that's why they kind of started transitioning and doing the same thing they did in Japan, because after the first 2 or 3 seasons of the original series, it kind of got like, repetitive, and they kept replacing characters. And by the end of it, it didn't feel like the original 5. So that's kind of why they transitioned to this new thing every year, I think. But it's kind of a lot to intake. But I think if you look back at it in the last 40 years, it's a pretty crazy history. And that's why you see all these memes and GIFs on the internet of these different like crossovers, because there are crossovers in of these different series from like all these different time periods. So that's one of the unique things you can do with a series like that, is have these different crossovers and multiverse, and like a Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse kind of situation. It wasn't Spider-Man that did it first, it was actually Power Rangers. So
Right, and you get to a point where the Power Rangers are so popular that you can then try to turn this into a film franchise. And I think that what makes this so unique is that this does take place between seasons, and there is one version of this story, but the way that the movie tells it is very different than the way the show tells it. And that is something that is fascinating to me, because this is something that just simply would not happen. You would not have a violation of continuity in dealing with any property that you see in current times. Like, you would never see, I don't think Marvel is going to try to tell a story out of continuity like this. I think DC kind of does it with the Joker, but even that, there really is no quote unquote DC continuity to maintain anymore. But this just feels like a very much a product of its time, and the movie has a very different feel and vibe from the show.
Yeah, that's the other unique thing about this because it literally takes place between seasons 2 and 3. And I looked at the releases. So season 2 of Power Rangers in America ended in May of '95. The movie came out a month later, so it was kind of this perfect transition. But once you go back to season 3 in September, they retell the story of them getting the new Zords and all that kind of thing, and getting the new animal spirit animals or whatever. So it's kind of weird, but at the same time, I think it's kind of this thing in anime that they kind of took it from, because I know for a fact when I watch Dragon Ball Z, and I know you're not too familiar with the history of Dragon Ball Z, but there's like all these TV movies that they released, like 13 movies, but none of them take place in the actual continuity of the main show. Like it's some alternate kind of universe, some alternate kind of telling of some stories that they make just for the movies, like the TV movies. So I kind of get the concept of that, but at the same time, I don't think they were really thinking that way, because doing the research, uh, Brian Spicer, the director of the movie, had no like intention of doing it like the show at all. And apparently, from what I'm reading, a lot of people think he didn't even watch the show at all, which is why that the tone is totally different from the show. And I get it, like maybe they wanted more of like a theatrical kind of feel to it, and I get that. But at the same time, at this time, Brian Spicer had not directed a feature film at all. He had just done TV stuff. So I'm thinking, like, if they really wanted this theatrical feel to the movie, why not hire a director who's actually directed a movie and not TV stuff?
I think you bring in a TV director because you want this done quickly. I think that's the idea behind bringing in someone, and also the fact that he is a TV director means that he is not going to try to enforce his will upon the production. Whereas if you bring in a more independently minded filmmaker, then what's going to end up happening is you're going to sort of have them wanting to bring in their vision, their mode of storytelling. But this was at a period of time when they were both shooting the movie and some episodes of the television show at the same time. So I do understand why this was happening, and I think it is a byproduct of doing the storytelling this way and just shooting things for completion as opposed to quality storytelling.
Yeah, that's pretty evident in the movie too. And then you mentioned they shot the show at the same time, parts of season 3. The movie shot in Australia, so if you ever watch season 3 of the Power Rangers and ever wonder why they shot some particular episodes in Australia, is because they were still shooting the movie at the time, so they kind of had to cross the productions over into that. So that's kind of why. So yeah, as you know, like the original 5, they're not in this movie at all. So Jason, Trini, Billy, Kimberly, and Zach, the original 5, and then Tommy joined later on in season 1, obviously, is the Green Ranger turning to the White Ranger. But in between seasons, I think it was like at the end of season 2, no, during season 2, I guess there were some contract disputes. So, Jason, Trini, and Billy, they ended up leaving the show. They got replaced with 3 different actors. They didn't want to just take over the roles and kind of just say they were the same person. They just created new characters. So you got Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. They had far less to do. I think Aisha probably had more to do than Trini, but at the same time, it's like Rocky and Adam were just kind of there, man, and they're just so terrible in comparison to Zach and Jason, I think, in comparison. But that's just kind of the way it is, because TV contracts and the way things went, and they were probably thinking that they were probably deserve more money than they were getting, and that's probably a reason for them leaving. And I totally understand that. So, and then unfortunately, the actress that played Trini died in 2001, so from cancer. So that's kind of unfortunate. But yeah, so in this movie we get 6 Rangers. 3 of them are original. Well, actually 2 are original. 1 came later on in the first season with Jason. He's kind of the main dog anyway. But that's kind of the roster we get for this movie. And as we mentioned before, the people that made the show did not make the movie. And of course, Brian Spicer came in as a TV director and kind of was given his first directing gig and kind of went from there. And you can tell like this production was kind of all over the place. It just kind of felt like, I don't know, they went for certain comedic aspects here and there with like the villain and Ivan Ooze and stuff. But then the writing is just so subpar, because they created the subplot with this kid that I'll probably even forget to mention, that if you just eliminate this kid in the movie, that it would have been the same movie pretty much. So it's just one of those things where the plot is not that great. But that's pretty much all the history of the show that we can kind of comprise and kind of compact into this, because that's the basic background that you need going into this movie, I think. Because I mean, you got to give the history its due, because not a lot of people know that this thing started in 1975 and that's still going today. Um, but yeah, let's kind of go into the heroes. Let's start it out with Tommy. He's kind of taken over as the leader role from the show. Jason kind of stepped down, and then he was phased out from the show. So Tommy's the leader, the White Tiger. You got Kimberly, Billy, Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. And of course, you got Zordon and Alpha in the background. But they don't really do much. I don't know. It's weird because Zordon and Alpha feel like they have more of a role in the show. And this one, they had like 2 or 3 scenes. And it was just Alpha going, ay, 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 and doing his usual shtick. I don't know. And then Zordon seems like he probably had some, he was trying, you know what I mean? Because in the movie, they show him like almost dying, and he's trying to be this like, mentor figure. But you can't really buy into it because there's no like character development to show you like a relationship between Zordon and the Rangers. It's like going into the movie, you just kind of just whatever. If you watch the show, you know the relationship, so they kind of skip all like relationship building, character background, character motivations. All that is like out the window, and there's like none of that except maybe like Kimberly, who's like the only one crying for Zordon, and everyone else is kind of just standing there like, oh, okay, we're just kind of going through the motions. So, but at the same time, it's like these are TV actors, so I can't really expect too much from them. I mean, later on they did get experience and whatnot. I think Kimberly went on to do like a famous like 90s Disney Channel movie, Susie Q, that I remember as a kid because I had a crush on her. So of course I remember that. But yeah, I just felt like Jason was kind of like, positioned as the leader and the one with the most dialogue and whatnot. But at the time, he didn't have like enough charisma and enough, he just didn't have it yet. If you look at him now, I think he's much better now, and I think he's ready to take on that like older Ranger role if he ever wants to come back and do like a revival or something like that. I think Jason's the perfect guy to do it, but it just feels like I don't know, man. The performances were just so lacking in this movie, especially like Rocky, Rocky and Adam were just so bland and terrible. At least Aisha had some character to her, like she had some like like she was motivated. It felt like. And of course, there's this other random character that's not even in the show, that's not even brought up again. Her name is Dulcia. She's like this, I don't know, Obi-Wan Jedi type character that helps the Rangers get new powers on this distant planet. And it just looks like something out of like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, or like Beastmaster, or like Deathstalker, or those stupid 80s epic fantasy movies that you can't help but laugh at. And it just seemed so out of place when she came in. It's just so random that the way she came in. So overall, I don't know how you feel, but it just seems so low on the scale for me because of the performances and the TV acting and not a lot of charisma to go around. I think I'm gonna have to go with a 4, man.
This definitely is not going to be the highest of our hero scores, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these actors are very good physical performers, evidently, based on what we see in the show and in the movie. But they're not the best actors because they're really not given a lot of material. I think that is the fundamental problem. I think the major issue with the individual cast members is that the actors playing Rocky and Adam do not have any personalities whatsoever. I feel similarly about Aisha, but I think she's a little bit better. I think the biggest problem, the biggest difference in the cast between the first time they were cast to the second time is that Austin St. John and Walter Jones, who played Jason and Zach respectively, those two, while they were not great actors, those two had personalities. And losing those two specifically, I think really hurts the movie. It is a shame that there was a contract dispute and that it could not be the original 5 plus Tommy, because I think the hero score would have been slightly higher. There is not a person on this planet who, if you were 6 to 8 years old and watched the show, your first crush was Amy Jo Johnson. That's just a fact. That's just the way that it is. Do you agree with this, Brian?
Oh, totally. I mean, it was her and like Tia Carrara because I watched Wayne's World like a few years earlier.
Right, and you will frequently mention Tia Carrere whenever she comes up in any of the discussions that we have about superheroes. So for me, I think that this is very clearly a case of where you are dealing with the not very charismatic actors. Plus, there is a lot of bad dialogue in this movie. And if I were to tell you that they did not have a script going into shooting this movie, then you could probably understand why the dialogue is so bad. And there's it feels like the characters in this case are a little bit snarkier, and there are a lot of really bad jokes. And I mean, my God, the payoff to all of this is literally the villain getting kneed in the proverbial balls and being destroyed by the comet because of that. So you are dealing with a very immature movie. And there are times when I was watching this that it reminded me a little bit of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with some of the immaturity and some of the feelings that they think they were trying to get from people. But ultimately, I did not feel that this was successful. And I think the entire thing going to Phaedos and doing what they were doing, they were clearly going for something very much like The Wizard of Oz or something of that nature. And I have another comp that I'm going to get to when we talk about the Turbo movie. But for me, this was very much like The Hero's Journey, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which is always cited for Star Wars. But I think this is another very clear example of that. These are characters that are getting back into nature and trying to rediscover themselves and earn this great power. Unfortunately, they're not individualistic. I mean, the best line in this movie is improv by Adam, of all people, when he says, because he is disappointed with the animal that he has received, that he is a frog. That's probably the best line in this movie, and that's not good. So I am also going to give this a 4, and I was very close to giving this something even lower.
Yeah, me too. It's just I don't know, something about Jason in that suit. At least he's got that. You know, they gave me that because from the show, that's kind of iconic, him in that white tiger suit and him being the leader. So at least they stuck with the suits too.
I believe you're talking about Tommy, correct?
Oh, sorry, Tommy, not Jason. Sorry, I mix those two up all the time. But yeah, so on to the villains, I should say. But this is definitely for me would be probably the highest score. So Rita and Zed, you know, they come from the show. They release Ivan Ooze after I guess construction workers find his like chamber that he's been encapsulated in for 6,000 years, and he gets out, and he's very entertaining. I think he's trying to do like a Robin Williams type performance where it's just like comedy and kind of like inside jokes for the adults and the parents. And I think he was like written for the parents to be entertained and kind of like, okay, I'm along for the ride. But I know, like you said that your favorite line was by Adam, but like I think you're wrong, because I think you missed the other line that Ivan Ooze said, and you mentioned it in the DM. You want to quote it?
He mentions the fact that he missed the Brady Bunch reunion. I should have put the caveat that it was my favorite line said by a Power Ranger. It is clearly not the best line, because probably the 10 best lines in this movie are said by Paul Freeman. And what a person, what a man.
Yeah, because Paul Freeman is the bad guy from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Not the one that has the glasses, but he's the one that gets drunk with Marion in the tent, and he's that asshole guy. Yeah, he's great. Like, I didn't even realize it was him until I researched this the other day, because I just thought like, oh, it's just a random dude who played Ivan Ooze, but he has actually got some acting credentials, and he was really great in Raiders.
Do you realize that he was also in Hot Fuzz as the priest?
Yeah, I was gonna mention that too, because I haven't seen Hot Fuzz in probably since 2007, to be honest. I know that's a bad kind of thing to say, but I completely forgot about that as well. And when I saw that, I was like, God, he's like in everything that I like. So he's all over the place, man. But here, he's under the makeup. You can barely recognize him. But hey, man, I'm laughing at him, and I'm being entertained by him. And he's like this B-movie villain, and it's like he knows that he's in a B-movie, and so he's just hamming it up and having fun, which is great because that's what this movie needs. So he brought some really, some entertaining stuff to the movie. Credit to him, because anyone else, they probably would have played it different and not go for the comedy, probably play it too seriously and too serious for its own good. And he did it right. He had that right balance of making it funny and poking fun of itself, and, poking fun of the Rangers and all that stuff, making fun of Zordon and Alpha. So I thought he did good, man. Like, considering, how shitty the script is and what he had to deal with in terms of the dialogue, I think he pulled it off. You got, Rita and Zed are kind of minor characters in this, because by the end they're rooting for the Rangers, because obviously Ivan Ooze was going to double cross them, because that's what all bad guys do. So they're more pushed to the side. They're not really the villains of this movie. I do like the fact they had Goldar still in this, and he became like the the crony or like the stooge to Ivan Ooze, the way he was a stooge to Rita and Zed. And I love Goldar's little one-liners here and there. I think Goldar's a really funny character. He's one of the things I like from the original show, and I'm glad they brought him back for the movie. And he brought some really some good comic relief here and there every now and then. So credit to that. So overall, the villains, I'm going to give a 6. It could have been way worse, but I think Ivan Ooze is just so, I don't know. He's entertaining enough that it's not so bad, but it keeps you watching. And it's 90s nostalgia fun where you got these crazy villains going for broke and people just knowing that they're in B movies and acting and hamming it up.
Something else that I find genuinely entertaining is the fact that all the other henchmen with Zed and Rita are gone, and they are replaced by this character Mordant, the pig.
Oh yeah, that's right. I guess they were at obviously they couldn't use all the background characters because that's from the stock footage as well, right? All those old creatures that they created, so they kind of had to compress it, and I get that. I forget the name of the other one, but that black, tall, like winged creature they took out. I forget his name, but he was entertaining as well. And that's one of the things I forgot about as well. I'd also I got to mention the fact that Ooze creates his own like henchman just by spitting ooze, and like it's disgusting and hilarious at the same time. So I thought that was really entertaining. Even though the bird suits look kind of ridiculous, but I did like the fact that his warriors exploded whenever they hit the wall or something and turned into like ooze. That was pretty funny.
Well, it is a 1990s movie, so of course it has to have ooze. I mean, that's just a mandatory rule. That had to happen at least multiple times. And Paul Freeman is on a heater. He is out of his mind. And it is a relief that he is in this movie, because whenever he is not on screen, this movie is kind of a chore to watch. But just the lines he's delivering, which admittedly are not good, and his line about the Spanish Inquisition and Brady Bunch reunion don't necessarily make sense, because how would he know that these things exist? But the fact that he is just going for it is something that I very much appreciate. And I think the jokes that were made about Apocalypse looking like Ivan Ooze are definitely legitimate. But Paul Freeman, I don't know if Paul Freeman is a better actor than Oscar Isaac, but Ivan Ooze is definitely a better character than that version of Apocalypse. And I very much respect the hustle of one Paul Freeman. I just hope that he didn't need the money and that this was not like a desperate paycheck thing. I hope he was able to, just relax and enjoy himself in this movie, because he's pretty great in it. And this is one of the rare occasions when my villain score is going to be the highest. For this, I am giving it a 6.
6 as well for me. Like I mentioned, I can't help but smile when I see clips of Ivan Ooze, and I don't know what. It's just the performance. Sometimes you just kind of go for broke, I think, and just have fun with it. All right, on to the story. Now, this is probably the worst score that we're gonna give here. The story's terrible. The dialogue is awful. It's not nearly as entertaining as the show is. Like, there's some pacing issues that I think the show does much better with. It's a lot more fun to watch the show. But let's kind of go over the plot really quick. Construction workers find Ivan Ooze's chamber. He's been put away for 6,000 years. Zed and Rita release him. They ask him to kill the Power Rangers and Zordon. He almost kills Zordon, but he's barely alive, and because of that, he also ruined their tech in their little chamber thing. So they have no more Zords. They have no more suits. They're stripped down. You know what I mean? So they have to refine themselves and find their inner spirit animal again, basically. So all of a sudden, Alpha mentions this great power that no one's even heard of until that moment in time, that they have to go to this planet, find this great power and get new Zords and new tech and come back and beat Ivan Ooze. So they go to this planet. They find Dulcia, who's just this random character that I guess is protecting the great power. I don't know why she doesn't get the great power for herself, which makes no sense to me. So she's like this Jedi. She's dressed very scantily clad in like this weird bikini. I don't know. I don't even know what to call it, but it's something straight out of like Beastmaster, Masters of the Universe, the live action movie, stuff like that. Just epic fantasy, crazy look. And it's just so out of place. It's random and out of place, and it just doesn't fit the show. Like, it's just so weird. I can't believe they went with that direction. I guess they needed time to fill, and I guess they wanted just a woman in scantily clad clothing walking around for 20 minutes trying to kick ass. So I guess that was the whole point of that like 20-minute section of the movie. So yeah, they get the powers. They fight these 4 stone creatures and beat them quite easily. And then they get these new Zords, new animals, and they're ready to come back. And they come back and beat Ivan Ooze up. And they basically, Ivan Ooze takes over the body of like the Zord that he created. That I guess he, use the manpower of all the parents in Angel Grove to manipulate them and mind control them into building these Zords. He takes over the Zord, fights the Power Rangers in space. They finally realize, oh, they got to hit the emergency button to knock Ivan Ooze into this comet. The emergency button is hit, and all it is a knee to the nuts, and that's the emergency button. So that's kind of that kid's cheesy humor right there. So they knee Ivan Ooze in the nuts, hits the comet, it explodes, and that's the end of the movie pretty much. And then you play Van Halen at the end, which we'll talk about in a second. But this plot is horrible, like very, very horrible. There's no character development other than Ivan Ooze, right? Like that's the only character development because that's the only background we get. Everyone else, far less to say, far less to do. I think according to my calculations, Ivan Ooze had more dialogue than all the Power Rangers combined, maybe. I think. I could be wrong on that.
It certainly would not surprise me, but it is totally understandable why they would do that, because he is just a more entertaining figure, and I feel like Dulcia gets a lot of the dialogue as well, as she gets kind of a lot of time to just give exposition and talk to the Power Rangers, and that is fascinating to me because again you have these 6 characters that feel almost like blank slates, and this is just something that again I don't think would happen in 2019. I think we've thankfully evolved our superhero storytelling to the point where we at least feel the urge to give basic character development to everyone involved. And I think that has been true for so many of the superhero movies that we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years. And I certainly think that there was a time when there were not 10 superhero movies coming out every year. And when we talk about the 2017 version, I think that's where this conversation will come back. But it's easy to see why this movie would make a good amount of money, a solid amount of money, because there just simply was not a lot of there. And in this case, you have one of the rare occasions when you can go to the movies and you can see superheroes and you can see the Zords. And I am sure that was not lost on a lot of kids who eventually would go to see this movie. But I think when it comes to the actual story itself, I mean, the story doesn't make sense. There do not appear to be a lot of parents in Angel Grove. It is very unclear how big Angel Grove is even supposed to be, and I think it is basically segments of Sydney, Australia. That is how I understand it anyway. And I think that ultimately this movie is so heavily reliant on the action sequences, which I don't think hold up very well 25 years later, and the CGI also very true. So based on all that, this is by far my lowest score. I am giving this a 1.
And I gave it a 2, so we're kind of on the same page there, not so far off. But yeah, it's terrible writing, but it's 90s terrible writing at its best, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, let's get to the technical stuff. As you mentioned, the CGI, man, it's terrible. They did not know what they were doing at this time. I felt like they rushed it and did not know the ins and outs of doing correct CGI. It's very weird because Toei co-produced some of the parts of this movie as well, because they produced the original series in Japan. So I don't know why they did it this way, and I felt like even the Godzilla movies at the time that they were releasing in the 90s in Japan, that Toei was releasing, look way better than what they did here. And I just felt like they didn't need to do CGI. They just should have stuck with like the plastic Zords, and you just shoot them, or you just make miniatures and just shoot them big and make them look large and do it old school style. You know what I mean? Like do it like they've been doing for years. But they just had to do CGI, and it looks so horrible at the end, like very horrible. I can't like, vouch for it. It sucked. But I did like the suits and the costumes, because they got the original suits and they kind of amped them up a bit, gave more like a leathery kind of shiny look. So they kind of improved the costumes. I do like that. I love the look of Ivan Ooze. I like the makeup a lot, despite him being in makeup for 10 hours a day. It is what it is. But I think, looking back, his makeup looks way better than Apocalypse, and that's a shoot. Like way better color, texture. You know what I mean? Just I love the jacket that he's wearing, and then The little thing at the end of his chin, like the weird little details on his makeup. I loved it a lot. I thought that was one of the best looking things in the movie. Um, Goldar, they had to kind of do the same thing, but I think they just used the same suit from the show, so they didn't really do much there. Zed and Rita looked the same, so they didn't really change that much. But I think, Angel Grove, they kind of made it look a little bigger than usual by shooting it in Australia, because they didn't really do that in the show, so they wanted to make the city look a little bigger. And of course, they do the thing where each ranger subconsciously gives it away that they're one of the Rangers by wearing the color schemes of the Rangers. So, you got Tommy in white, Rocky and Adam in red and black, and all that kind of thing. So everything that's just like the show. So that's kind of cool that they did that. They kind of matched that up. But other than that, like, the soundtrack is okay. But, they did play Red Hot Chili Peppers' Higher Ground at the beginning, which I totally forgot about. I was like, God, yeah, this is totally a 90s, like, action movie now. And then they played, of course, Van Halen Dreams at the end, and that's one of my favorite Van Halen songs. So, soundtrack is decent to me. But again, the CGI is awful, just so awful. Costumes look good. I did like that they used like that set for that the planet, and it kind of reminded me of like Last Jedi or End of Force Awakens and Luke's planet. At least they shot that on location, and that looked really awesome because like you see the rocks and like the ocean in the background, so that looked really good. Credit to them for not doing a set. So my overall score for the tech stuff is 5. I probably would have gave it a 4, but I love that song "Dreams" by Van Halen, and it just really like plays well at the end of the movie, and I got to give credit to that in the editing. So they had the right music cue there. The thing that brings it down, obviously, the CGI on the Zords.
I think the CGI is so atrocious, and we see so much of it. I think that's the other problem. It's not that this was 1 or 2 shots. This was basically the entire third act, and that is, to me, unforgivable to have CGI that just looks that bad. And I think the soundtrack, I don't have as much of an attachment to some of these songs and some of these groups, so it's very hard for me to talk about the soundtrack in a positive way. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I'm more neutral than anything else. I do like the makeup job on Ivan Ooze. I do like some of what they did with Zordon once he is out of his chamber. I do like some of the designs of like the Tengu Warriors and some of the rock monsters. So I think there definitely were some good things in the corners and in the back end. But as far as the main thing, I think the biggest issue that I have is that the CGI looks so bad, and it's hard to kind of forgive that. And the other thing is that I think the editing, for me, I think the biggest problem with the first 2 Power Ranger movies is that they are seemingly longer versions of the episodes, and it doesn't work. I think that is the problem. The Power Rangers has a very specific formula, and if you are going to uphold that formula, it is just simply not going to work. If you are doing a 90-minute movie or a 2-hour movie, it's simply, you have to develop these characters more. They clearly are not willing to do that. So what you end up with is a 90-minute movie that I think almost feels like it's 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and it does not get any better next week. In fact, I think it gets much worse. So for me, in thinking about the technical score, I cannot be as forgiving. I'm giving this a 3.
I totally understand that. That's fine. I'm just, I love the music cue at the end, so we'll talk about that in a second in one of the burning questions. So let's go to the legacy. Now, originally I was going to give this a 4, but then upon doing the research again, I was like, God damn, a lot of people remembered Ivan Ooze when X-Men Apocalypse came out. So it got me thinking, like, God, it must have just been resonating in a lot of people's subconscious, or at least in the the pop culture subconscious. And the fact that immediately came out to a lot of people, like, God, that's Ivan Ooze. And it wasn't just a few people; it was tons of people. So what that says to me is that this movie sticks out in a lot of people's minds for different reasons, but especially Ivan Ooze, obviously, because the performance is so good. So yeah, man, it's weird. Like the budget. I mean, if you look at the box office, it did 66 million worldwide, 39 domestic, 20 million budget. It's decent numbers. It's nothing like out of this world, right? It should have been a lot better, I think, considering that it was a pop culture phenomenon. But I did look at the research, and yeah, it did come out 2 weeks after Batman Forever, and it was the same month as Pocahontas and Apollo 13. So it had a lot of competition in June of '95. So I get that. But in terms of the legacy, I can't help but think of X-Men Apocalypse as being a part of its legacy now, and how that's kind of like raised its stock a little bit. So again, I'm gonna go with a 5, only because X-Men Apocalypse brought Ivan Ooze back into the pop culture world.
I think if you are assessing the Power Rangers legacy in the overall sense, I would be much more willing to give it a 6 or a 7. And I think a lot of that actually has to do with the action figures, which I think we've touched upon. But you cannot underestimate that value to this franchise. And I think that is one of the reasons that it was able to sustain itself as long as it did, because the action figures were so cool, and putting the Zords together and the different costumes and all that stuff. For me, I'm giving this a 4. I don't think that a movie like this ultimately has the legacy of so many others. And for me, I think the legacy of the TV show, I think, would be far greater. But for just evaluating this individually as a movie, I have a much harder time seeing it that way, because I don't think that, to me, the Batman 1966 movie is so connected with that show, because it was all, not only was it the same actors, but it was the same look, and the plot was just about the same. I guess it was quote unquote within continuity. The only difference in the cast was Catwoman, and there were 3 Catwomen anyway. But here there were different cast members. This was out of continuity. It had a very different feel from the show. So for me, that's why I am settling on giving this a 4.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat as you. Like, I feel the show is much higher in terms of the legacy than the movie, but it's kind of forgotten at times. But like I said, X-Men Apocalypse just brought it back. So there you go. My final score is a 22. Your final score?
My total score is an 18.
So overall, 40 out of 100. It's kind of where it should be. It's nothing spectacular. It's just like a slice of 90s pop culture, kind of like a nice view into what 1995 looked like at the time in terms of the pop culture and the color schemes of the 90s and the music and all that stuff. So it's worth checking out. I mean, if you want to, there's a Shout Factory release of it. Shout Factory is a company that releases a lot of cult fan favorites and kind of gives them like a nice Blu-ray treatment, so you can go out and check that out. They also released some of those earlier Power Rangers seasons that they adapted into the American show, if you want to check that out as well. Because there's some interesting changes to the plot. Like in the original Power Ranger series that they or Super Sentai that they took from the original first season, Tommy and Jason, or at least the characters that whatever their names were in Japan, they were actually brothers. So I thought that was a really cool twist that they did. They should have brought over to the American version, but they didn't. And 2, Rita actually killed their sister way back when. So I thought that was like a really dark turn that they did with it that they didn't bring over to America. So I feel like if you want to see the darker version of these episodes and get a different tone to the original show, definitely check out those Shout Factory DVD, Blu-ray releases, and check out the original shows in the original format. Subtitles are okay, guys. It's okay to like subtitles. It's not, subtitles are your friend. There you go. That's my opinion on subtitles. But on to the burning questions. Now, it's going to be interesting because I'm not sure if you're a fan of Van Halen, so we'll get to that in a second. Number 1, who is your favorite Power Ranger?
My favorite Power Ranger, I think there is only one correct answer, and that would be Tommy. He was really the only one that I kind of cared about at the end, and he is the most memorable. I think part of it is that he started out as a bad guy, and I think he automatically had a little bit more personality. His hair is incredible also in these 2 movies. That is also something worth pointing out. And I don't really see how you can make an argument for anyone else. Maybe Billy?
See, mine as a kid was Billy, but as the show grew, it became Tommy. But originally it was based on the color scheme because, my favorite color as a kid was blue, so automatically you attach yourself to the Blue Ranger, right? So that was kind of cool, having, the Blue Ranger. And I remember when kids used to bring their toys to school and you know what I mean? You get to pick and choose which Ranger you want. Everyone off the bat wanted the Blue Ranger. Number 2 was the Red Ranger. At least the guys, obviously. So I thought that was a little interesting that it was just, just blue the color overall is like a draw for kids, you know what I mean? So I thought that's very subconscious, you know what I mean? The whole color scheme idea. So number 2.
Brian, before we go, you can find out if any of your friends were racist if they asked you to be the Yellow Ranger.
Oh, totally. We went through that as well. Believe me, those were some interesting discussions as kids. Like, why do I have to be the Yellow Ranger? Yeah, I remember some of my Asian female friends questioning that when we were children. So I get it. I get it. You know, it is what it is. Also, a little side note too. Now that you mentioned the Yellow Ranger, people that don't know this, like in the original Japanese version, the Yellow Ranger was a dude. That's why if you watch the action footage, the Pink Ranger Kimberly has a skirt on her suit, and the Yellow Ranger Trini does not because it was originally a dude. So just weird things like that when they transfer things over from America or from Japan to America. Number two, burning question: better villain, Ivan Ooze or Apocalypse?
Now, if we are we comparing only movie to movie, or are we comparing Ivan Ooze to Apocalypse's entire legacy?
Movie to movie. So Oscar Isaac's Apocalypse versus Ivan Ooze.
Ivan Ooze, and it's not even close.
Totally on the same boat. Like I couldn't help but feel bad for Oscar Isaac after watching this movie again and thinking, man, Ivan Ooze was way better than Apocalypse, and it shouldn't be that way. You know what I mean? Like Apocalypse should be a much better, much more well-written character, and yet Ivan Ooze just tops him somehow. And whatever, man. You know, it's Bryan Singer's version of Apocalypse. It is what it is, and hopefully in 10 years we'll get a remake of Apocalypse and it'll be much better and true to what the character is. And I mean, I did enjoy parts of Apocalypse, but goddamn, Ivan Ooze just did it better, and I felt like it sucks because like Oscar Isaac is such a good actor, and they wasted him in that role. And even the makeup looked better in Ivan Ooze. That's what I got to tell you about that one. So, number three, did you buy any of the toys as a kid?
I did buy the original Ranger suits, and I had a couple versions of the original Megazord. So yes, I am one of those people.
I never got any of the Zords as a kid. They were a little too pricey for me, so my parents kind of settled on the figures. And of course, the famous figure, the one that was the big one in '94 that a lot of newspapers and news media covered, was the one where you press the button and their heads flip from the regular heads to the mask. And I thought that was so cool, man. And like I mentioned earlier, I mixed it up with my wrestlers, my toy wrestlers as a kid, and it just made sense to me because like those Power Ranger toys were so maneuverable, especially the arms and the legs. You could do so much with them. Like you can bend them, you can have them do knees, have them kick, elbows, all that kind of thing. Way better maneuverability than some of the Hasbro and Galoob stuff at the time before WWF changed their contract. So I thought it was really cool that I can kind of use these as wrestlers too. So it was like a double whammy for me. So as a wrestling fan and as a Power Ranger fan, that was pretty cool. Number four, I don't know how you're going to answer this one. This is going to be interesting. This is more for me. Van Halen or Van Hagar?
Music is one of my big weaknesses, and I really don't have a good opinion on this, and that's unfortunate, Brian. I think you should have prepared me for this one. Maybe send me a couple samples, and then I could give you an opinion. I will just go with Van Halen because they are the more famous of the two.
This is also like an Airheads joke that I wanted to tie in. I don't know if you remember that joke about asking about whether or not is it Van Halen or Van Hagar, and then that kind of determines what kind of music fan you are, if you're a true metalhead or not. For me personally, I think they're both great. I love Sammy Hagar's like take on the band, and his vocals kind of made it more pop kind of friendly, which is okay. Like I feel like when he took over as lead singer, Van Halen became more of like music to listen to when you're working out or like getting hyped up or something like that. And the original Van Halen with Sammy, what's his name, David Lee Roth, the original lead singer of Van Halen, I felt like he brought that grungier like metal kind of feel to it. And then that's okay too. It's like you can be both. You know what I mean? You can be both this pop kind of band and like a rock band, like metal band. So that's kind of my legacy and my take on Van Halen. Because as I mentioned before, I love the music cue at the end, and I love the song "Dreams" by Van Halen, which is a Van Hagar song, but it's still one of the more popular songs. So I wanted to give credit and the proper due to that song. All right, burning question number 5. Do you see any of the original cast members come back and reprise their roles in the upcoming Power Rangers movie in some sort of multiverse concept a la Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse?
I will probably be able to better answer this after we watch the 2017 version of this movie, but unless it is in a cameo role, I'm not even sure that I would be interested in a Power Ranger movie multiverse concept, because I think part of the problem is that, again, I think this is a very niche thing that had its time in the sun, and I don't think there is really a way of recapturing that. I think you've also seen that with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think it is certainly successful on television on Nickelodeon, but I just don't think that there is enough of an audience. It's not going to hit those 4 quadrants like something like Marvel or DC is going to do. Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are very much for, maybe people like us to an extent, but I don't think a lot of adults have interest in seeing a new version of the Power Rangers.
For me personally, I keep hearing they're going to do this thing where they're going to do this time travel thing and kind of cross over and go with the 90s original version. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But based on what I'm hearing on that, like I totally could see like Tommy and maybe even Jason coming back and kind of, being the Harrison Ford and just doing like, the Force Awakens thing and coming back and reintroducing it to the new generation kind of thing. And I totally see that happening. And I know it's not going to be like a major box office difference to do something like that, but I feel like if you pay those two, like, I don't know, like $1 million or $2 million each, I think that'll help the box office an extra 20 or 30 million for nostalgia pops for people like you and me. It's not going to do crazy extra business, but I think if you cast those 2 people or something like that, or even Kimberly, you'll get like a good return on your investment kind of thing. Nothing totally, like I said, nothing totally box office crazy, but enough to make a little more money than the Power Rangers in 2017 did, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much it for this week. We kind of went over the movie and kind of the history of the show. And yet there's another 90s movie coming up, and we're going turbo next week, aren't we, Jerome?
Yes, I have to be honest and say this might be the worst movie that we have watched for this show.
Well, it's going to be interesting because I actually watched this movie in theaters. I did not watch the original in theaters. I watched Turbo in theaters. And looking back now, it's pretty cool to think about because I watched it in theaters in '97 with my aunt, and she recently passed away on Christmas Day. So looking back now, it's kind of cool to watch this movie again and thinking about when I watched it the first time in theaters with her. It's kind of cool to look back on that. So that's going to be kind of a special thing to look back on as well. So shout out to my aunt, Atitantai. Well, I miss you, and God bless.
Yeah, I certainly think that it'll be. I think our conversation next week will end up being more interesting than the movie itself. And I know that you are going to be excited to talk about it. And yeah, it's just a really. What makes this franchise so weird is that all 3 movies are really, really different in tone and obviously the logistics. So things are going to be very different. I think with the Turtles, I think there was a little bit of consistency. Even with there were like 2 Burton Batmans that were very similar, kind of 2 Schumacher versions, and then the Nolan trilogy. I mean, we're just dealing with 3 kind of very different films, and I was way checked out of the Power Rangers by the time Turbo came out.
Yeah, it was definitely past their date in terms of pop culture hysteria. So, but we'll talk about that next week as well. It's like it's the end of the era of the hype of the Power Rangers in the '90s. So we'll talk about that next week. So for Brian and Jerome, thank you for listening, and we'll go turbo next week.
Rest in peace, Johnny Ian.